In this nugget, we'll be addressing the hardware and readiness compatibility for your Windows 8 installation. The first thing we'll do is take a look at more details with the Windows 8 editions or SKUs. So we'll take a look at that, as well as determining whether or not you want to use 32-bit or 64-bit editions of Windows 8. We'll also take a look at which one of the SKUs you would want to install in an upgrade process, especially because you can't always upgrade from one operating system to the other. There's specific upgrade paths. And then we'll take a look at an upgrade of Windows, of a previous version, as opposed to a clean install. Let's jump right into Windows 8 editions that are available. Thankfully, this is much simpler than it used to be. I mean, with previous versions of Windows, you had the Starter, Home, Home Basic, Ultimate, Enterprise, Nuclear, I don't know, all these different versions of Windows. Now with Windows 8, we really have three basic desktop editions, plus there's Windows RT, which we'll talk about. Also, if you want a full comparison of each individual granular feature, go to this link right here. This is cbt.gg, and then this is all case sensitive out here on the end. Regardless, that'll take you to a good page, and the reason why I linked that is because I'm telling you, if you go to Microsoft's webpage and you just go to the Windows section of Microsoft.com and you go to Windows 8 and you go to compare things, this is what you wind up with. Compare and decide. And it gives you this kind of oversimplified thing here. But look, we're missing Windows Enterprise Edition. So I don't know why they couldn't seem to include that in here. So that's really just kind of too basic. So that link that's at the top of that whiteboard will take you here instead. And this is a very feature-complete list of all of the different features, including Windows RT. But we're really not discussing Windows RT for this course very much. Anyway, it's 8 Enterprise and Professional here that you see, and there's a full list of all the different things here. But here I'm just going to kind of run down the basic idea behind each one of these. First of all, Windows 8, with no additional name there, is good for the Basil version. Basic. Oh, anything tastes better with Windows 8 Basil version. No, this is just kind of a basic edition of Windows 8. It's economical, doesn't cost very much, and it's really just fine for almost any home or small office, home office environment, students, folks like that. Any application, for example, like Microsoft Office or any other app that I can think of that you could install on Windows 8, you can also install on Windows Enterprise, for example, and vice versa. If you have a high-performing application or something very demanding, such as Photoshop, for example, which is what I'm running even to do these whiteboards, well, that'll install and run just as well on Windows 8 as it will on Windows 8 Enterprise. However, there are some additional factors that we should consider. Well, first of all, again, there's also going to be the same UI, so we get the same, start charms and start screen and all that kind of stuff. But when we upgrade to a higher level of Windows 8, of course, you're going to have to spend a little bit more money. So we'll see that. But this is going to be the Professional Edition. It's really geared more towards businesses. One of the key reasons for that is because although we get the same functionality of Windows 8, we also get to add on encryption there, as well as a few other features. But that's a pretty big one right there. For example, you could use BitLocker to go. You could use that too. And by the way, BitLocker encrypts an entire hard drive. If you don't want to encrypt an entire hard drive, which is very useful, for example, for lost external hard drives or laptops, then you could go to EFS instead, or the encrypting file system, which is also included then with Windows 8 Professional Edition, and that allows you to encrypt simply individual files and or folders. Okay. There's also the Windows 8 Enterprise Edition. This will include many different additional mobility features in addition to what you get with Windows 8 and Windows 8 Pro. For example, with Windows 8, you get direct access. This is a virtual private networking solution that allows you to, for example, with a laptop, connect to the home office even when you're on the road. As long as you have an internet connection, it automatically creates a connection to the home office, and it allows you to have the same resources as if you were in that home office. Now, there's been a variety of different virtual private networking solutions that have been devised in the past by Microsoft and others. Direct access is one of the more complicated methods. It's a little bit beyond our scope, but it is also an extremely powerful and useful and easy for the user method for VPNs. There's also things such as Windows to Go. This is very useful because you could take a big thumb drive, an 8 gigabyte thumb drive, for example. If those are very abundant out there, easy to get a hold of and not very expensive, you can actually install Windows on that thumb drive, and then you can take it with you when you go, for example, to a partner office or something like that, or some other a vendor that you're going to visit, or you're making sales calls, you go to visit somebody's kiosk, you can just plug in that thumb drive, boot off of it, and actually be using your own personal copy of Windows with Windows to go there. We'll talk more about that here as we go along. You've probably seen commercials and so forth. Microsoft's got a gigantic marketing push out for the Windows Surface tablets, and they're actually pretty fun commercials to watch. I'm not sure if the tablet's as fun to use as the commercial is to watch, but anyway, it uses something called Windows RT, and this is going to be for ARM processors, and that's what we use for tablets. Okay, you cannot install Windows RT on any desktop, nor can you install a desktop operating system such as these first three that I listed up at the top on a tablet. These already come installed with Windows RT. You don't have to do anything to install them. It's just already there. Now, one of the next questions that comes up often is, should I use a 32-bit version of Windows, or should I use a 64-bit version of Windows? This is really not much of a question. The answer is always going to be use 64-bit versions of Windows. Particularly, of course, if you have a 64-bit CPU or a processor. If you have a 32-bit processor, you're stuck. You have to use 32-bit version of Windows. But almost anything you will have bought in the last several years, in fact, will be a 64-bit processor, so you might just as well use it. One of the things you're going to be able to get is a higher CPU, I don't know if utilization is the right word that I use there, but a higher CPU availability. Because it's basically kind of like a 32-lane highway as opposed to a 64-lane highway to the CPU. Now, many things you will not notice any improvement in performance. If I'm just typing a letter in Microsoft Word, I doubt if I'll see any difference between 32-bit and 64-bit. Although I would hope that 64-bit would help me to type twice as fast, but unfortunately, it doesn't do that. Likewise, if I'm using calculator, the 32-bit version is not going to be any slower than the 64-bit version. I was hoping that the 64-bit version would double my bank balance, but it doesn't quite work out that way. So some things you really won't see too much difference for there. The key there is going to be your RAM. So if I've got greater than 4 gigabytes of RAM, I'm definitely going to be better off going with the 64-bit version, because the 64-bit version can go this way. If you use just the Windows 8, why is my pen not working? Let's try that again. Windows 8, and I'm just going to call this the basic edition, even though it's not really called that. That can use a maximum of 128 gigabytes. That's gigantic on a 64-bit edition of Windows 8. It used to be you can only get that on servers, and not even on all servers. Only some would do it. Now we have with Windows 8, let me just kind of expand this out a little bit, Pro or Enterprise, that'll accept up to 512 gigabytes of RAM. I don't even know motherboards that support that now. You probably have to come up with some kind of a custom solution to even install that many memory modules. But anyway, most folks have more than 4 gigs of RAM these days. Again, it may not make that much of a difference. If you run just very simple applications, you're running Excel and Microsoft Word, and you have an occasional game that you like to play, or solitaire or something like that, you'll never notice the difference. If you run high-end applications, very demanding applications such as Photoshop, and I keep going to that because it's one of the most intensive applications that are out there, and I run it quite a lot, then you're definitely going to benefit from the additional memory. Also, the 64-bit version doesn't cost any more than the 32-bit version, so again, you should use it. It's kind of funny. I remember back when I was in college, I went over to a friend of mine's house. Several of us went over there. We had a party or something we were doing, and he was showing off his brand new stereo. And back then, it was extremely fancy and a very high-end, had all kinds of, I don't know, blinking lights and whatnot. And we were all very impressed. And then he turned it on and actually started playing music through it. It sounded like it was a transistor radio. We said, what in the world is going on here? And we looked down at his speakers. He had little tiny speakers from Radio Shack. And we said, why are you using those speakers? And he said, well, I couldn't see spending $500 on speakers. Well, it's kind of the same way here. If you got a 64-bit processor, don't put Radio Shack speakers on there. Put on a 64-bit edition of Windows. Now, the other advantage you'll get there, and this is a big one, is Client Hyper-V. This is very useful in terms of backwards compatibility. You may have an older application that does not support a 64-bit version of Windows. So you may have to install what we call Client Hyper-V, and that allows you to actually install an older version or a 32-bit version of Windows inside of your host operating system. And I think we discussed somewhat about virtualization in our last nugget. But Client Hyper-V allows you to do a number of things. For example, with the 64-bit version, which is the only one you'll be able to have available with Client Hyper-V. Actually, I think I have a web page open for that. Let me show you there. You do have to download this. Now, one of the things that you may have seen about Client Hyper-V is that it's included with Windows 8. It is not. First of all, it has to be a 64-bit version of Windows. Okay, so it has to be that one. The other thing is the technology, the virtualization technology is kind of built into Windows 8, but the actual application of Client Hyper-V must be downloaded. There's the link that you can see. Actually, you can't see it, can you? There's the link up there. So I'll just leave that to you. Actually, it might be too much typing, so I just went ahead and put it here on the screen, and you can see it right here, okay? All right, the other thing we have here going on is that we also get better security. So, for example, you can get data execution prevention, which prevents malicious applications from running without your permission, or prevents applications from running within the system. So that's going to be something that will help prevent there. And then there's KPP, which is kernel patch protection. This will also help to prevent some rogue application or malware from overriding key operating system components. We will have required driver signing. This is something we also had with Windows 7 and Windows Vista. And with this, what we can do is to make sure that any of the drivers that are installed are going to be signed drivers. When a driver is signed, that means that Microsoft has affixed its digital signature to that driver, indicating that it's been thoroughly tested and it's deemed stable with that version of Windows. So this is going to help improve stability. It's not really directly a matter of 64-bit. It's just that when you run 64-bit, you have to have signed drivers. Kind of forces you into a more stable environment there. Then there's also broad driver availability nowadays. I remember when the first 64-bit version of Windows came out years ago, it just happened to coincide with the time that I needed to buy a new laptop. So I went down to, I think it was Best Buy or Fry's or something like that, and I saw a big sticker on a shiny new laptop that said 64-bit processor. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. I'm going to get a 64-bit CPU. 64-bit Windows is going to be on it. I brought it home. Guess what? It was 32-bit versions of Windows. Why? Because the vendor was not able to install all of the device drivers because there weren't enough 64-bit drivers. So even though I had a 64-bit processor, it didn't matter. I could not use all of its functionality because of the drivers. Well, now we have broad driver availability. You can still get 32-bit drivers, but just about any device that you want is going to have a 64-bit driver. Also, and this will be handy as well, most Windows 7, and I might add into that Windows Vista as well, most Windows 7 and or Vista drivers will work just fine on Windows 8. It's really the same code base. And so you should be fine with that. Now, the only reason why you might want to stick with 32-bit, and that's where I would say 64-bit's the answer, unless you need to use 16-bit versions of applications. These would be much older applications. They could be, 10 or 15 years old. They might have been developed by a company that's no longer in use, but it's mission critical to your business. There's no way to upgrade it. There's no way to get it rewritten. You just are stuck with it, and you have to use it. What the WoW means is, wow, that's too bad, or no, that means Windows on Windows, and that's just a version, a way that these 16-bit versions of Windows would be able to work in a 32-bit operating system. So the 16-bit apps would work in, using WoW, a 32-bit OS, but they could not work in a 64-bit operating system. Okay, so that's kind of the limitation we had. Now, if you're stuck with those 16-bit apps, you may have to just install 32-bit versions of Windows on all the desktops. But another option there would be something we discussed earlier. That is Client Hyper-V. You can download that. The download's free. And you can download that and install it on your client and then run a 32-bit version of Windows. It could even be an older one, Windows 7 if it's more compatible, or Windows Vista, even Windows XP or something like that if you want to. You could run that on your Client Hyper-V virtual machine while you're running a 64-bit version of Windows for your host operating system. So you get all the benefits of 64 in your normal desktop operations. When you need to run that one troublesome little application, you can use Client Hyper-V. Now, before I move on to another topic here or continue our discussions of Windows editions and all of that, I'm going to take a brief side tour here to talk about screen resolution. This is actually one of the exam objectives. It's the first time I think I've seen screen resolution as its own exam objective. But anyway, let's talk about it. Here, if you want to run Metro, and that's what Microsoft says in some of their verbiage still. They don't call it Metro anymore. I think it had to do with a copyright issue or something like that. Nevertheless, on some of their web pages and some of their documentation, they still call it that. What we're really talking about there is the start screen. I guess I can add that in for clarity. I don't know why my pen's acting weird today. Start screen, and I'll just say apps. You know, it's like those full screen types of apps that you can get on the start screen, such as, I think there's Xbox Glass. My son discovered that the other day. And or something like Internet Explorer or Windows Media Player. You know, all of those things that can use the full screen. I mentioned in the last nugget, you have to have a minimum vertical resolution of 768. So if you want to run Metro at all, or the start screen and their apps, 1024 by 768. Now, if you want to use something called the Snap feature, this is going to require 1366 by 768. What in the world is that about? Well, this allows you to use kind of two applications side by side. We used to call them Windows. No, I don't know. Now we call them Snap. This would be if one of the Windows applications is open over here, you can kind of snap it to the screen. And it'll stay kind of in a sidebar, if you will, or in a portion of the screen, and you can adjust the size of it, of course. And then you can be running something else over here. You know, this might be Microsoft Word. This might be my, Windows app or whatever type of it is. And I can kind of run both of these side by side. Here I might have, music playing. I don't know if that's a musical note or not, but I'm trying to make it look like one. I might have music playing over there while I'm writing something over here. Alright, I decided to kind of change my screen resolution here so that you could see what I'm talking about with a lot of these different things, such as the Windows applications. And we couldn't really see them in the last nugget. Also, this is going to be kind of hard to read probably, because I have to take a full resolution that's the minimum resolution that we just talked about there of using 1366 by 768, and I have to squish it down into 1280 by 680. So it might be a little distorted or hard to read, but you'll get the idea here as I go to the start screen and I go, let's say, back to my screen here for the sports. Okay, if I go to that, maybe open another thing here again. I'll go back to photos. Okay, and then I'm going to go back to my desktop. Now, what we talk about the Snap feature, I can go up here. Notice when I hover my mouse pointer up, it shows the most recently used application. It's supposed to also show the other applications that I use, but notice that they only appear if you kind of go drag down the left side. When I first hovered up there, it only shows me that one. You have to, follow this very narrow divider down here. Oops, till the other ones pop out. Now what I can do is I can say, hey, I want to keep sports over here to the side. Now I've just snapped that item. Okay, so let's just go ahead and take a look at the NFL or something. Oh, there's no game schedule because I'm in the wrong season. Anyway, you get the idea there. Okay, so then the other thing I said was that you can resize this. You really can't. You can, but you can choose only one or the other. You would think that because of the double arrows here, I can make this just a little bit bigger or a little bit bigger. But really, you can only switch places with the main desktop, with the other application that you have. Wow, what a cool picture. Anyway, so that's all you can really do. You can only switch places, but you can't go 50% or something like that. It's 25% and 75%. And then if I want to get rid of it entirely, you drag it off to the side, and it goes away. Now I'm going to go back to our regularly scheduled screen resolution to make this a little bit easier. Now then, the last fun fact to remember is that the maximum screen resolution you can use is 2560 by 1440. Now, let's move on here to which SKU or stock keeping unit you can use, especially in terms of an upgrade. For a full upgrade, if you're starting with Windows 7, you could go from Windows 7 Starter, Home Basic, or Home Premium editions to Windows 8. Okay. For Windows 7 Starter, Home Basic, or Home Premium, Professional, or Ultimate, okay, you could upgrade to Windows 8 Professional. For Windows 7 Professional or Enterprise, you could go to Windows 8 Enterprise Edition. So pretty clear upgrade paths there, and that kind of makes sense if you think about it in terms of what the original starting point was for the Windows 7 installation and what the destination is. So, for example, if you're running a home basic, there's not much likelihood that you would want to upgrade to Windows 8 Enterprise. So they kind of make sense in terms of that. And then in terms of the migration, this would be where we're not necessarily going to perform a full installation. We're going to be talking about migrations a little bit later on, probably in the next nugget. This is going to be kind of the best of both worlds, where you kind of get an upgrade, but not really, and you kind of get a clean install, but not really. With this, you're going to really pretty much get mostly a clean install, and then you just migrate your data over there. So that would be, for example, with Windows Vista. Notice that we are not upgrading from a Windows Vista installation. We're doing a migration from a Windows Vista Released Manufacturing Edition or Service Pack 1 or greater, or Windows XP with Service Pack 3. With those, we're doing Windows 8 or Windows 8 Professional. Okay, so that's your upgrade path. Also bear in mind that if you started off with a 32-bit version of Vista, XP, or Windows 7, you can only upgrade or migrate to a 32-bit edition. You can't all of a sudden jump the gun and go to 64-bit. Likewise, if you started off with 64-bit in the previous edition of Windows, you can only upgrade to a 64-bit edition as well. Now, the next question to address is whether or not we're going to have an upgrade or a clean install. So again, we're going to talk about migrations a little bit later on, probably in the next nugget. But for a fully compatible upgrade, and by that I mean there's no compatibility issues. You've run some of the tools that I'll talk about, and none of them show any problems with your drivers or your applications or any backwards compatibility issues. If it's a pretty good upgrade or fully compatible, then it's going to upgrade your personal files. It doesn't actually upgrade the files themselves. It just keeps them. And it's going to particularly keep in mind anything that's in the user folder. So if we were to take a look, for example, let me just drag over Windows Explorer. And this would be applicable to previous versions of Windows as well. Notice there's a users directory here. Within this, you have the names of the users. So anything, for example, in the specific user folder for trainer, where would I have my music, my pictures, my videos, my desktop, anything in any of those locations would get kept or preserved in the upgrade. Now, there's also the Windows settings. Your profile is, and it doesn't actually translate or migrate over all of your Windows settings during an upgrade. Okay, it just depends on if there's a one-to-one correlation between your previous version of Windows and Windows 8. All right. Now, if you had custom wallpaper, maybe you downloaded it from the internet, and you really like the graphic or whatever it is, it'll keep that because that's still part of your user file system, and maybe you save that into pictures or whatever. It's going to be able to keep that sort of thing. But anything that does not translate directly from the old operating system to the new one, it can't. It'll also keep any hardware settings that you have it. And it doesn't always do this, to my experience, perfectly, especially when it comes to things like screen resolution, but it's supposed to give you the same exact screen resolution that you had in the previous version of Windows. Any other hardware settings, such as, maybe you've got a Wacom tablet, where that's what I use to do all these drawings and stuff like that. It should keep my pen pressure settings, for example. Any of those types of things it should be able to keep. Any applications that you've installed, well, most of the time that'll install just very gracefully. I have to say, in the migrations and upgrades that I have performed to Windows 8, the upgrades have gone very, very well. I have not yet run into a single problem. Amazing. And that's probably the best, smoothest upgrade that Microsoft's come out with going to Windows 8. However, there may be some applications that will need a reinstallation, and this could be because of the way they write data to the registry or any files that they write. Windows does have a way of tricking an application into thinking that it's writing into a legacy folder when it's really not. So you may need to reinstall, especially maybe an older application that's still compatible, just older. Also, you should consider disabling your antivirus software, because it will detect changes to operating system files and interpret that more than likely as a virus, because antivirus applications do not like things to touch system files. And of course, an upgrade will drastically change those things. So you might want to disable that. You also want to check with your vendor to see what their recommendation is for the upgrade process. There may not be a new version of the antivirus product that's compatible with Windows 8. Now, I can't think of any that have lagged behind. They should all have a Windows 8 version of their antivirus product. Many of them you have to pay for. You can't just get a free upgrade to the Windows 8 version. So I think Microsoft and these antivirus vendors are all in cahoots or something like that. Also, if you do use Microsoft's own Windows Defender, for example, which includes antivirus and anti-malware types of stuff, that should upgrade gracefully. You shouldn't have to have any concerns about that. This is going to be a pretty big advantage as well. When you go to a fully compatible upgrade, you get minimal interaction. You just launch the upgrade. It reboots a couple times. When you're done, you have your charming little, start screen and your charms and all that stuff. It's usually pretty fast. In fact, you may not know this. Windows 8's code base is actually shaved down dramatically from Windows 7. So it actually got a smaller code base, and it should run faster and more efficiently than Windows 7. And I'm reading that directly out of the Microsoft marketing materials. Just kidding. It should actually be faster, though. It's also basically a 5-step process, which I'll kind of give you the rundown here. First thing you want to do is to evaluate, and you can use a few different tools to do this. So one of the tools that you can use there, and these would be more for corporate environments, would be the Application Compatibility Toolkit, or ACT. You don't have to do that from a corporate environment per se. Anybody can use it. You can download it for free from Microsoft, and it just runs through your system on your existing operating system, say Windows Vista, Windows 7, and it will determine whether or not you have applications or hardware that could be an issue. There's also MAP, and this stands for Microsoft Assessment and Planning, and this is going to be more of the corporate. I'll put corp up here. This is definitely more of a corporate tool, and it's going to be able to analyze a large scope of computers to scan for any potential problems that you have. There's also the Windows Assessment and Deployment Kit for Windows 8, and this again can determine any problems that you might run into. Then it would also back up your files. Now, even if you get a smooth upgrade, if you're pretty well assured that everything's going to go just great, still back up. You just cannot back up enough, pretty much. You always want to make sure that you're not going to lose any files. What if the system blue screens right in the middle and it does some kind of a catastrophic hard drive failure? Well, back up. That way you can restore your data later. And also, upgrade. That's just going to be the actual process where you insert the DVD, and then it launches the little wizard, and you click Next, Next, Finish. We'll look at that in the next nugget as far as the Next, Next, Finish steps. And then once you've performed your upgrade, you want to also verify that everything has gone okay. Try to launch all the applications that you use. Try to use the hardware devices that you've got attached to it and see if everything works out okay. Also, the Windows 8 Setup Compatibility Report should appear if there's any problems relating to your devices or any of your applications. And then I would also recommend that you update. And this is because Windows 8 out of the box, like any previous operating system, will have some kind of a vulnerability or a security hole or stability issue. It's just made by humans, so it's going to have some of that. And by updating it immediately using Windows Update, you're going to be able to download patches and updates that hopefully close a window of vulnerability there. And then for a clean install, we have some other things to keep in mind. Oh, by the way, look at my lines here. Aren't those straight? Aren't you impressed by how straight these lines are? Now, I've been told that if you can draw a straight line, that's a sure sign of intelligence and sanity. All right, I used a shift to draw, where you hold down shift while you draw the line and it keeps it straight. My actual lines look more like this. Okay, doesn't say much about my sanity or my intelligence. Anyway, clean install. The advantage here is going to be that you inherit no problems, because you're not going to have old applications that were incompatible in the first place, and you don't have them anymore because basically you wipe out the hard drive when you do a clean install, or you have a new hard drive in the first place. It's also going to it's also going to require that you have centrally stored data. So if there's any pre-existing data, you're going to lose it in a clean install because basically it erases the hard drive or formats the hard drive. The option there would be in a corporate environment, at least, if you have a home directory. This would be something where users, when they save something to My Documents, for example, in previous versions of Windows, it actually looks like it saves it on their local My Documents. In reality, it saves it on a network share. So that's where you get your centrally stored data there. And that way you don't have to worry about it. Then when they launch Windows 8, then you may use other methods to remap a drive for them for their home directory, and they can just pick up where they left off. Their data has been untouched by the clean install. You can also back up and restore. That's a little bit more of a migration, actually. So if you back up from your old system, do a clean install, and then restore the data, it's more of a migration. You can also keep this in mind, and this could be labor intensive. You have to reinstall the applications that you want. Now, there's some things you could do to help alleviate that. You could do an application deployment solution, such as System Center Configuration Management. It has a lot of different ways of deploying applications and packaging them up. This would be something you'd probably do on a weekend, where over the weekend everyone's computers are turned on, and it deploys them from a central server out to those clients. You can also use group policy objects, and we're getting way beyond scope here, but you could also use group policy objects to automatically deploy those applications. Or you could use baseline imaging. Now, we're not really talking about that quite yet here, but what very often we'll do in corporations is we'll install a machine in our lab that has the exact desktop configuration we want for all of our users. It has the exact applications that we want. It's updated with the latest Windows and antivirus updates. It's pretty much our perfect golden machine. And then we save it into what we call an image, and that image can then be deployed en masse across all of our desktops. Again, maybe over a weekend or something like that. So that would also usually be a clean install, which we then copy and then more or less paste to all of our destination clients. And then we would also have to reconfigure any Windows settings that we wanted to have, and that's obvious. You'd have to redo that. The alternative there would be, again, if you have a centrally stored roaming profiles. With this, under previous versions of Windows, and it continues in Windows 8, if we have our desktop configured in the exact way that we want as a user, if we're using roaming profiles, all that configuration, including registry settings for the user, is stored on a central server somewhere. Then when we go to another computer or a newly installed Windows 8 machine, for example, it will download that profile to that destination new Windows 8 machine, and we get to keep all our settings. In this nugget, we took a look at evaluating the hardware, readiness, and compatibility for your impending Windows 8 installation. We first of all took a look a little bit more at the Windows 8 editions and what the main purpose for each one of those are, and kind of in broad terms, what the advantages are. There's also an important link there that you should at least look over to identify some of the key features of each of the editions. We looked at 32-bit editions of Windows versus 64-bit. Obviously, the big advantage there is going to be memory utilization, although you also do get some additional CPU utilization in certain instances. We took a look at which SKU to use, especially during an upgrade, because you can't just upgrade from any edition of Windows to Windows 8 Enterprise, let's say. You have to go a specific path. And then finally, we took a look at the advantages of an upgrade versus a clean install, or vice versa. They each have their own advantages and disadvantages. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.